Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. Being a CMO has always been hard. Throw in a global pandemic, and you have an unprecedented pressure cooker boiling with unbounded uncertainty. It is at this moment that the CMO's relationship with their CEO really gets tested. But here's an important truth in both good times and bad times. No CMO can succeed without a strong working relationship and the trust of their CEO, which is why on this special episode, my guests today are both a CMO and his CEO. Now, just to be clear, David Friend, or we'll call him Dave on the show, is not your run-of-the-mill CEO. David has founded or co-founded 5 other companies that have been sold, including Carbonite. Now, longtime listeners will remember that episode 41 featured Norman Guadagno, who was the CMO of Carbonite back then. Anyway, David's current company, Wasabi, was founded in 2015 and is a truly hot cloud storage company that prides itself in being 80% cheaper than Amazon AWS. And Wasabi's CMO is Michael Welts, a 25-year veteran of tech and the startup world. Now, Michael, as it turns out, was hire number 8. We had a bunch of engineers, the founder, but Michael was founder number 8 in 2000, hire number 8. And since then, in those 3 years, Michael's only been able to help the company grab 15,000 customers. So come on, Michael, what's the problem? Anyway, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
And it's the same thing Dave says to me all the time. What can we do better?
Yeah, come on. Now this is exactly what this show is about. Let's get a little give and take between the CEO and the CMO. Anyway, let's just talk first about the world that we're living in right now. Where are you, David, and what's it like?
Well, I'm in downtown Boston, and it's pretty well deserted. The Newbury Street, which is kind of the big restaurant and shop street, looks post-apocalyptic. It's just a very strange experience right now.
Yeah, and Michael, what's going on in your neck of the woods?
I'm up in New Hampshire, so social distancing isn't all that difficult to achieve.
All right, gents. Okay, but let's talk about. We're hunkered down. We're all keeping our physical distance, as some are suggesting. Let's talk about Dave. Maybe you could sort of give a framework for how did this pandemic sort of impact you as a leader of the organization, and what were some of your first thoughts?
Well, we're growing very, very fast, and we grew 5x last year, and we're planning to grow 3.5x this year and 3.5x again next year. So, any company that's doing that is consuming cash, obviously. So my first thoughts were, as the CEO and the chief fundraiser for the company, is how's this going to impact our cash? And so I decided probably a good idea to put a little more cash in the till. So I'm just right now wrapping up an additional investment round, which will be concluded in the next few days.
Yeah, that's an interesting, and I there's still capital out there that needs to be invested. So, and given your track record, that makes a lot of sense. Did you need to also so cash is number one, and that's been talked a lot about. Is it like how many months of operating capital do you have? That's great. Now, what other things from an operational standpoint did this impact?
Well, I'm always watching charts of various key performance indicators in the company. And, the one that's at the top of the list, obviously, is how much did we sell last week? And, I keep watching that for some signs of a downturn. But 5 of the last 7 weeks have been, record weeks. And, so things just keep going up and up. And I'm not talking about small increases. These are pretty substantial increases over the best weeks that we've ever had. And I have 2 theories. One is that, storing data is is a gotta have, not a nice to have. I mean, when a hospital takes an MRI or a CAT scan, they still have to store it somewhere, and people are not going to turn off the police body cams or stop the telescopes in Chile from sending data, or the satellites, or, making feature-length films, all the other stuff that we store. And the second part is, with people sort of hunkered down and in a hunkered down mentality, maybe the idea of saving money goes to the top of the list, as opposed to some of the more speculative projects that they might have on their plate.
Yeah, and I was wondering about that. I read an interview that you did back in early 2019, sort of pre-pandemic, and you said then that 90% of the folks that were buying were strongly influenced by your value proposition.
Yeah, no, I mean, price is important. That's why, we're 1/5 the price of Amazon. And, that's probably number 1, 2, and 3 on why people buy us. And number 4 is probably performance, being faster than Amazon. And number 5 is we're not Amazon. I mean, there are a lot of people that just don't want to give a nickel to Amazon for whatever reason,
So one of the things that Michael and I spoke about is that you have always baked sort of marketing into the product from the beginning, from a very conceptual standpoint, before you even launched the company, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the show. And that's a very enlightened perspective. Can you talk about how you think about marketing as it relates to your product offering?
Yeah, I think in terms of billboards, I mean, a lot of people talk about elevator pitches and things like that. I think in terms of billboards, although, I haven't taken very many billboards out in my life. We did a few at Carbonite. But, I like things that are easy to sell. I don't like complicated products. I don't like things that are, have to be explained and explained. And, when I was teaching at business school, 8 or 10 years ago, I had as an exercise for people who were trying to come up with ideas for new companies. Show me the billboard, write it up. I've got 10 seconds to catch somebody's attention while they're driving in on the Mass Pike. And how am I going to get my point across? And so that's the way I think about things. And that's why, we made Wasabi so simple. There really isn't anything to learn about Wasabi. It's an API. It stores your data. It doesn't matter what kind of data it is. It's like the electric plug in the wall of your house. Plug in whatever you want.
And is that literally, from a business plan standpoint, when you thought about this, you literally got it down to those words? It's an API that stores your data.
Yeah. I mean, our original quote billboard was 1/5 the price of Amazon and 6 times faster. That was it. That's all you need to say. And
now it's interesting, and it's very feature driven and function driven. But you actually also have this very funky name.
Well, you want to have a name that is, when you hear it, you can spell it. I can't believe how many companies there are that have names that could probably be spelled 25 different ways, and how the heck it's hard enough to get someone to go search for your company online, and, why make it difficult? It's also a name that you can remember, and it's hot, which is, we're dealing with hot cloud storage. It's actually a great name. Carbonite was a great name too, but Wasabi's even better. And Mike and I went through, maybe 200 different possible company names for this business.
That's right.
And when we saw Wasabi, we both looked at each other and said, I don't know, I don't care how much it costs to get this name. This is the one that we have to have.
You knew you could build a hot company around this.
Yeah.
And so that's if we want to talk about marketing wisdom, folks, we could stop the show right here. Make a product or service that anybody can remember and say in 8 words or less, and then come up with a name that is equally memorable and unique. And you are that's 90% of the game. So Michael, I'm thinking of you, the marketer now, like a catcher waiting for the pitch to be thrown to you. I mean, tell me, in this environment where you have a product that is 80% cheaper and 6 times faster, What's the marketing challenge?
Gee, let me go back to one comment Dave made.
I gave him the easiest job on the face of the earth.
I'm going to say I want that job. Come on.
Yeah, price is definitely the thing that resonates more than ever right now. It really is. But also, you have to give some credit to what's been done over the last 3 years to build that brand so that people recognize the brand and go looking for the brand. And I think that's why we've seen the success. If you look back 3 years ago, it took us a year to get our first 1,200 customers. Two years later, we're at 15,000 customers. We're storing data. It took us 5 months to get our first petabyte of data. Now we're doing 3 petabytes of data a week. Expect to be a petabyte a day by the end of the year. So you have to build a memorable name. You have to build a new category. And to your point, that's kind of what we've done here. Hot cloud storage is a significant new disruption to the old traditional cloud storage market.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hey, it's Drew, and I wanted to have a quick conversation about turning lemons into lemonade. Here are the lemons: skiing, Park City, January 11th, third day, last run, going fast. Light was bad, a lot of snow on the ground, 50 yards from the bottom, I crashed and burned. Literally tumbling down the mountain, did a 3-point landing with my head and 2 thumbs. Broke the right thumb, sprained the left thumb, finished up surgery 5 days later, and now I have a little extra time on my hands. What do? I finish a special report that I've been dying to finish for a long time, which is a way for me to get to my next book. It's a preview of the book. You can find it on renegade.com. On the very beginning of the homepage at the top, there's a banner that says B2B Special Report. I would love it if you took a look at this and let me know what you thought. I think you're going to find a lot of value in it. Okay, there was a lot going on in that last bit of the conversation that I want to unpack, Michael, as you were talking about it. But before I do that, I'm curious, what kind of adjustments have you had to make as a result of the pandemic and any changes, if any?
Well, our message is still around pricing. I think if there's any change that's happened is actually primarily in the how we message ourselves from a social strategy. That's changed dramatically, and we have to be sensitive to the environment. We meet daily as a marketing team and bear witness to what our competition's doing from ad strategies. There's some brand new ad strategies that come out claiming huge cloud offerings by some of the largest vendors out there, like IBM and Dell. Just over this past weekend, and we haven't seen that from them in the past. Everyone is jumping on board this cloud message suddenly. We've been there for a while now, and we just are more sensitive about how we talk about ourselves socially. We don't get involved in a lot of the talk or make it appear that we're trying to take advantage of this unfortunate situation right now.
Yeah, nobody wants to be perceived as a vulture, right? And I'm not. For sure. But let's talk about, so what adjustments did you make in social? I mean, how do we talk about a product that's 80% less, it costs less and 6 times more as faster, but still, and have this conversation that probably now more than ever, that's a pretty good value proposition.
Yeah, it is. So it was certainly, I would say probably 70% of our messaging is still around pricing. But now what we're doing is we're diving into specific use cases, or let's call them vertical industries that represent what's going on in the world right now. As David cited, about medical images, huge storage requirements for that. The fact that you need to keep your cloud up and running and you want to be able to access your data. Well, right now, because of everyone working at home remotely on Zoom, things are crashing. You still need access to your data. You still want to make sure you can store your data safely. So we change our message to reflect those kinds of market situations.
Interesting. And I'm wondering, Dave, as you think about this, the current market that we're in, and the likelihood is business is going to slow down, right? I mean, it is, some business has got to got to be taking a hit. How do you, even though you have plans in the pre-recession world, you have plans to keep growing. In your mind, is with the market potentially slowing down a lot, how do you as a CEO sort of plan into that?
Well, some businesses are slowing down clearly, and there are other businesses that are accelerating, and you read about those in the paper. I think in the case of data storage, I guess if a business goes out of business, they're not going to generate any more data. But, people still have to do their backups. And, we got thousands of companies that send us their backups every day. People aren't going to throw away data that they might have otherwise have saved. And as I said, I think that there are a lot of people that have expensive ways of storing data, and they've been putting off looking at, how do I save some money on this, because there've been other projects that, have taken their attention. But now with everybody kind of like having this bunker mentality, they're saying, well, maybe I'll focus on, staffing issues and ways that I can save money. And one of those that's been sitting on my plate that I haven't had time to do anything about is to take a look at this Wasabi company and their claims that, I could actually save some significant amount of money on my data storage.
Right. Okay. So I'm curious, I want to get back to the very beginning premise of the show. What do you look for in a chief marketing officer?
So, that's a good question. When I love marketing. I mean, I'm I started as an engineer, but, with my very first startup, after we built our first product, we looked around the room and said, okay, who's going to go out and sell this? And I was the least unpresentable person among us.
That's a qualification, the least unpresentable. Well done.
So, and then I discovered I really liked it, and I really liked the ability that I seemed to have for how to explain something simply and to listen to what people were saying and try to figure out how does what they're expressing inform what we should be making and offering. And I think a lot of marketing is simply being a good listener. It's about, not simply responding to what a customer or a prospect says, but trying to see what's underneath it. What are the motivations beneath it? Because I do feel that you can't always run your business by just kind of looking at your list of features or something that people say they want to add. It's a bit like driving by looking in the rearview mirror. But you have to listen to a lot of different points of view and then sort of synthesize them. And what I heard in our market and which resonated immediately with Mike is, people just want data storage is not exciting. Data storage is something we have to do, and I'd like to do it the cheapest, simplest way possible. And, when Mike and I first had our first conversation, that resonated with him immediately. And he said, I totally get it. And, not many marketers do. Most people are complicators, not simplifiers. And when I met Mike, I said, here's a simplifier. And there aren't a lot of those people around.
Well, it's funny. I love all the things that you just said, but simple's hard. It's a lot harder. It's a lot harder than anybody realizes. It's only simple when it's proved to be simple. And I think you're right. A lot of marketers are complicated. So Mike, what makes you a simplifier?
It's interesting because my background, unlike Dave, is not one of being an engineer. And in our industry, in tech, most of the people that wear the marketing hat usually come from a technical background. They're product management or product marketers. So to Dave's point, they tend to think of speeds and feeds or product features. My long-standing view has always been that, features ultimately commoditize. So it really comes about how simple of a message you can refine things down to. And I think, that's kind of my differentiation, if you will, among others in our space. I've kept it extremely simple. I intentionally don't go deep into the technology so I can tell a simple story. I keep it uncomplicated by doing it that way.
Okay, so keeping the story simple, and with a name like Wasabi, you got to have some fun. I mean, when Mike, when you and I were talking in our pre-show, in our prep show, we talked about Wasabi as the ultimate ingredient brand. And it's funny because, and I didn't get there initially in the sense that I thought cloud storage, well, that's not an ingredient. But so talk a little bit about how, in fact, because you have a channel that's important to you. Right. How does this work? So you're really more like Intel than I might have thought.
Well, when you build startups, achieving scale is the greatest challenge. And, you can build a direct organization to get those early adopter customers. But building a great company, an exponential type of company opportunity, comes down to going through the channel. So we've done it in a couple different ways. There's the obvious channel, which would include things in our business that we call managed service providers. Kind of like, 20 years ago when you had internet service providers, they'd provide you anything from cable television to internet services. Nowadays, managed service provide you different types of cloud services. They might offer you data storage, but they also offer you backup and recovery services. So you go through those providers. The ingredient side of the equation, though, comes in with technology partners, where you secure the largest backup and recovery vendors in the market, and you become the ingredient to them. So when Veeam is out there with their 300,000 customers and 80,000 channel partners, they're saying, back up your Veeam, or back up your data on Veeam, and get it 80% cheaper on Wasabi.
Right, because you're white labeling it to them at that moment.
Exactly.
Or green, I think you were probably green labeling it to them.
We're actually doing, yes, we're doing the white label, but we're certainly allowing them and encouraging them, as is the case with NTT. They just signed a big deal with us globally, and they are going to be powered by Wasabi.
Powered by Wasabi. Now, I think I wrote something down about Wasabi peas. What was that about?
Yeah, so that goes back to the simple message, right? The easiest message we had right out of the gate. And by the way, Dave was right on. When he interviewed me at his dining room table at his home, he said, tell me what the billboard is for Wasabi, or for, at the time, the company's called codename Blue Archive. So, gave me I had to get a little thought, but he had given me some advance notice of what he thought the value proposition was going to be. And we eventually got to where we're at today. But the second tier message has to be just as simple. So I called it the Wasabi piece. And it's 3 simple messages that we build our sales strategy and our value proposition around. It's price, performance, and protection. So, 1/5 the price, performance that is better than any of the competitors on the market, and the protection, which takes care of the whole fear of security and ransomware. So those are the 3 things people look to for getting into the cloud with their data.
And there you are. And that's the easiest message to communicate to the sales folks. All they have to do is stay with the Wasabi peas, and they got this. So I'm going to go back, Dave, and not quite let you off the hook completely on the CMO question. Tell me, when a CMO hasn't succeeded with you, and there must have, you run enough companies that there must have been one, what was the problem?
Well, the problem, again, was just making a big deal out of something that's a small deal. And, Carbonite had a pretty simple product, but you'd be surprised how hard it was in the early days to find somebody who simply could, avoid getting down into the weeds and talking about features and so forth, and just talk about fear. I mean, Carbonite was a backup company, and what sold was, how would you feel if you woke up tomorrow and all your data was gone? That's the billboard.
There it is.
And how it does it and so forth is, those are details. But let's stay above that. And that's what, Mike's talking about with respect to Wasabi, is let's keep the message one level up from the, okay, well, tell me what your technology is and explain, this spec and that spec and so forth. Nobody's interested in that right off the bat. That doesn't sell.
It sounds like it's really about staying on the bigger story. Great place for us to take a break. We'll be right back. I'm back. I'm not going to talk about skiing, but I do want to talk about the special report that you will find on renegade.com. There is so much meat in this, in the 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy in 2020, that there are probably some folks out there that think I'm crazy to put that out there in front of a firewall. But I'm really hoping to get feedback from some of you all on the report, perhaps what's missing, because again, the book is going to be developed against this outline, but fleshing it out. There might be some guests that could help fill in some of the areas. You may disagree with some of the things. I'm really interested in your opinion on this piece, and your engagement with it will really help make the book that much stronger. So you'll find it on renegade.com. Very top, there's a banner that says 12 steps to a more effective B2B brand strategy. Take a look. All right, we're back. So one of the ways that I know that CMOs and CEOs don't often communicate is on metrics. What are the metrics that matter? When you look at marketing, what are your expectations? What are the metrics that you think really matter?
So yeah, I have my own dashboard and my own KPIs, and obviously we look at the results, which everybody does. But I like to look for those things which are leading indicators of results. So, in some companies where, sales are driven by direct response, you want to look at visitors to your website. So, let's say somebody comes to your website, they download a free trial, and 3 or 4 weeks later, they either buy it or they don't buy it. So, you can tell after a while by looking at these leading indicators what's going to happen down the road. And that's extremely important for a company like Wasabi, because we have to go out and buy equipment in advance of people actually sending us their data. You don't want to sign up with Wasabi and then, oh, I'm sorry, we're sold out. So focusing on those things, which if done well, will result in something else happening downstream, is the most important. And those will vary from company to company. But at any time I'm looking at a metric, I try to say, what is it that we could be looking at that would give us an advance warning on this particular metric? And you'll find you can move back and back and back until it gets pretty fuzzy. But most people don't really focus on, moving back up that chain of leading indicators.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting and so dead on, because so many, I'll have this conversation with a CEO and it's basically revenue. Would you generate? Well, revenue in B2B land can be 6, 12, 18 months down the road. How'd you get there? It's not a very good leading indicator. So,
no, it's a lagging indicator.
Right.
And you shouldn't be focusing on it. You should be focusing on what things, if done well, will result in revenue.
And so then we start talking about pipeline. And I think, Mike, you and I talked a little bit about some of your metrics. From a marketing standpoint, when you're going in and saying, hey, this is looking pretty good, what is that? What is it that's looking pretty good?
So first of all, as Dave just explained, we started out building brand association or brand awareness right out of the gate. And it was in our KPI, literally from a marketing standpoint, for probably the first 18 months of the company, was coming in and measuring website sessions and free trials as a result of the 30-day free trial signups. But they've now morphed into top of funnel activities, and ultimately, moving people down through because the size of our deal has grown so much larger now. So it's a longer term sell, but even in that case, it's still less than 30 days to close some of these larger accounts.
Wow.
It can extend out to as much as 6 months, but that's the power of a very effective value proposition. You're losing money while you're not switching over to Wasabi, right? So they move rather quickly to try it.
Well, why wouldn't somebody buy Wasabi? And the answer is probably because you haven't heard of us. And the second one, which you get for the first several years of any company's life, is who the heck is Wasabi and why should I trust you guys with my data? And that's the marketing challenge that Mike has. And that's why we invest in brand. We spent millions of dollars building brand awareness. And a lot of companies don't do that. They'd rather spend that money on product development or something. But
it's very atypical for a startup company.
Yeah, in my view, you raise a little more money, you give away a little bit of more percentage of the business to whoever your investors are, and you spend that money on building a brand, because that's something that nobody can take away from you.
And it's fascinating. Brand is hard to measure. And I've actually, somebody has said to me, well, you can't eat brand. And that idea was that, well, whereas I can eat a lead or I can eat a closed sale. So I'm curious, and brand is also very difficult to measure. Do you, I guess you consider website traffic a proxy, but do you do any kind of brand awareness measurement?
Yeah, so the closest thing we have to that right now is our Net Promoter Score that we run on a quarterly basis. And very proud to say that we are right up at the top where the tech industry normally ranges. In fact, we're twice where Cisco is on their NPS number, as an example. So, and we're twice as much as twice the number of the on-premise storage vendors like a Dell EMC. So it says it is tremendous customer satisfaction out there. It may not speak overall to brand awareness.
Right. Okay.
They're building, we're building a good reputation and rapport with the customers that are out there.
Yeah, it's what does your brand stand for? And, at Carbonite, I actually got to the point where one time I actually went out on Huntington Avenue with a clipboard and stopped every random person who was going by whether they'd ever heard of Carbonite. And, we invested heavily in brand, and we had 11 times the brand awareness of any other backup company in the consumer space. Now, I'll tell you why that's important, because let's say somebody comes along and says, gee, I can figure out how Dave Friend and Jeff Flowers built this really cheap and effective cloud storage. So I'm going to go to Kleiner Perkins and raise $50 million and compete with them. And you're the customer. And so this new company comes along and says, gee, we're just like Wasabi, but we're 10% cheaper, or we're 10% faster, or something like that. And you're the customer, and you look at it and says, well, what do you have for customers? What do you, I never heard of you guys. Where did you come from? And you say, well, we got this and we got that. And then they say, well, yeah, but Wasabi's been out there for 2.5, 3 years. They already have 15,000 customers. We hear about them all over the place. I think I'll go with the one that everybody else is using. And that's brand awareness. That's where the image, what does Wasabi stand for? And Wasabi stands for always the lowest price. There's no point in going shopping, because our commitment is we're always going to be the best value in cloud storage. And, and that's what Mike has been building with Wasabi, is that ability when the CIO or the IT guy goes in and says, I think we should move our storage to Wasabi, you want the person on the other end to say, oh yeah, I heard of them. There's really hot company. Well, how do you get that image in the marketplace of being, wow, they're a really hot company? That's marketing, and that's what Mike does.
I'll give you a quick example. Over the weekend, in fact, it's one of these perfect storm situations. It's between brand, it's between what's going on in the world today, and it's the momentum of the company. But we had over 16 different threads in different social communities talking about not only Wasabi, but how does Wasabi tie into, protecting your data through this crisis that we're going through. And it was on, communities like Reddit. We were all over Reddit this weekend. And I'd like to say that was a planned marketing strategy this past week that we implemented. We've been doing a slow build of our involvement inside Reddit over the last 9 months. Clearly, it's paid off from a brand perspective, and people are starting to do the price analysis and looking at us and talking amongst themselves.
Yeah, well, you're smart to go slow build on Reddit. They'll sniff you out pretty quickly. Yeah, and you'll get a lot of thumbs down from them.
Yeah, exactly.
But that makes sense. So I'm curious, because the decision makers in the cloud storage on an enterprise level are a select group of people, right? It's not a vast number of people across medium to large businesses, which I think you've now sort of targeted. I'm curious, how are you actually building awareness with them right now in this chaotic world that we live in?
We have a number of different areas that we do it in. We will in 2 months launch a fun social challenge campaign that will go out. It's a low-cost campaign, but we expect literally millions of hits as a result of it, because it's something we've done in one of our previous lives as tech startup marketing people. So we have a good campaign plan for there. We're also switching up our messaging so that it reflects a new type of offering for the company, where you can basically reserve your storage far in advance instead of pay for it as you go. And because what's happening in the market right now, the unpredictability of the amount of data you need to store or retrieve causes you to want to have more predictability and security in knowing what the price is going to be. So we've introduced something called reserve storage. So you can now lock it in for a year, 3 years, 5 years, for as much data as you want. And instead of having to worry about a part of the organization that's asking for more data to retrieve more data, you now have a secure price. We spend a lot of time around that. Lastly, to answer your question, a lot of time also hitting things like, believe it or not, something like a Sirius XM radio, where we have a great target inside the IT decision makers, the C-suite, on some of their, not just Howard Stern type shows.
Right. So I'm curious, and then I want to sort of wrap things up. So Dave, when you hear Sirius XM and you go, okay, that's a program, you can't really measure that. And there are some folks that would say, don't do it if you can't measure it. But that one's got to be a little tricky, right? To distinguish that noise versus any other noise what do you say to the people who say only spend money on things that you can measure?
Well, I mean, a statement like that wouldn't say much about your marketing savvy. That's for sure. It's very hard to measure the results of those things. And a lot of marketing is very much gut feel. And, if you've read any of the books by any of the great marketers, they always talk about the disconnect between the spend and the results. And the fact that it's very difficult to figure out which portion of your marketing spend is actually working. So this comes down to experience, I think. I mean, there aren't any really good numerical ways to measure these things in the short term. But, very often you can see, for example, if I tell Mike to go cut his advertising budget by 50%, the numbers will go down.
Yeah. And
that's for sure in the aggregate. Now, which, is it Sirius XM or is it NPR or is it, Computer Weekly, or what is it that's causing it? That's a lot harder to know, because anytime you try to measure those things, you end up putting friction into the process. You're forcing the customer to have to, in some way, tell you, or the prospect tell you where they're coming from, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
And so you wind up ticking off your customers or your prospects by looking intrusive or nosy, and so you just have to. This is where experience and sort of gut feel, I think, comes into it. It's like when somebody presents you with 2 or 3 different concepts for a TV ad. Which one are you going to go with? Well, that's a judgment call. There's no way to know without testing them all, and testing them all is out of the question.
Yeah.
So you don't want rookies in this job.
Experience does help. And one thing I'm curious about is, let's assume for a moment that we are about to go into a pretty radical recession. It is known, but few believe it, that when you spend money in a recession, you can actually gain share. Because so many people cut. So you have 2 advantages. 1, rates have a tendency to go down, and 2, your competitors are cutting budgets. So I'm curious, do you see that as this whole sort of all that's happening right now as sort of just right playing into your position?
You're totally right. And, you're not going to see Wasabi disappearing from the airwaves, that's for sure.
Let's talk we have a bunch of CMOs listening who thankfully spend some time with Renegade Thinkers Unite. And I'm curious, Dave, if you had a group and you were talking to them, what sort of 2 do's and a don't for them as they approach their role?
Well, I think, first you have to be an idea generator. And So yeah, a CEO, doesn't want to have to come up with all the ideas himself, but he does want to take a look at ideas, and he does want to think about, how can I get outside the box and take some risks? Anybody who's in my position is used to taking risks. And, I'm betting the farm every day on one thing or another, including my own money. So, what I like about Mike in the in the CMO role is, God forbid I should put him in the CFO role. What I like about Mike and his team is they come up with ideas, and so every week we're considering something new. We reject most of them one way or another, but out of that comes a flow of creativity that I think rivals the engineers in terms of this is innovative and this is what's putting the company on the map. In terms of don't do, I think over analysis, for me, it's boring to start with. And you can quickly draw erroneous conclusions. And so, if someone comes in and says, oh, well, I want to attribute this result to this cause, you have to step back and say, okay, well, first of all, that's past, it's water under the bridge. And do we really want to dwell on that? And, let's keep trying something new until we find something that works. So, and then, also I think overproducing stuff can be, sometimes, at Carbonite, the amount of money that we'd spend on something where, you could get 90% of the results for 25% of the spend. And there's a lot of people that the more they spend, the more successful they feel for some reason. And that's not the spirit of a startup. It's not the spirit of a company that, that wants to be, a fast mover. You've got to be able to find those things where, you get a lot of results for a small spend, even if it's not, quote, the most polished way to do it.
Great advice. And Mike, I'm curious. I really want to just congratulate you on choosing a CEO very carefully. And I want to wrap the show up with that because I've said this a lot. CMO cannot succeed without the support and trust of their CEO. Full stop. Now, what does that trust look like? Well, you just heard it. And you heard it in a number of levels. Think big picture story. Back that up with ideas that finish up with this story. Think big picture metrics. Don't look just at revenue. Make sure you're thinking about awareness and pipeline. Think big picture, because that's what you're not on when we're talking about metrics. If you're buried in the data, they're looking at you going, what are you doing? I'm thinking big picture. And that's what this whole conversation was about. And if we think about Wasabi and big picture and what they all did from it, interesting name from the beginning. Talk about a brand just built into the name, hot cloud storage, pun right there. 2, knowing what your value proposition is up front and baking that in to make your marketer's job easier. Gotta love that. So if your CEO isn't Dave, you may want to talk to Dave and find out who the other ones out there are like him, because I got to tell you, this has been very special talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. I want to thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's always fun to see Mike. He looks like he's growing some fuzz there.
Yeah, well, I think I was thinking about that too. We're gonna call that the pandemic beard.
That's exactly right.
I just shaved mine off.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you again, and to the listeners, thank you for joining the show. We really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a tense time for everybody, and just be well, take good care of yourself. And until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.